We'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
This episode of Talking Couch Potatoes is brought to you by Henry Houndwear, the brand that all the best dressed hounds are wearing. To find yours, go to henryhoundwear.com.au.
Maleficent, we're back again.
Yeah.
Well, is it because we're 61? Is that what it is?
Yes, I'm feeling tired.
Because we're in our
old.
60s? Yeah, we're in our
Old.
60s, listeners. Talking Couch Potatoes, episode 61. We don't want to be here. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The whole purpose of this podcast is to make it redundant because it's not necessary. But while it is, we hope to entertain, inform, and inspire. Mel?
Yes.
What entertaining or informing or inspiring things have been happening lately?
Well, nothing really, to be honest.
You can't say that. No.
Sorry. Okay. So, Matthew, we spoke a couple of episodes ago about the review that the government was doing.
Yeah, you mentioned it, and it was in the dead of political night.
Yeah, it was
really.
on the 30th of December.
The stuff the government wants you to know about, they don't
No, they
cloak
don't
it
put
in
it
the
there.
cover of New Year's Eve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's the independent review into financial sustainability and governance of racing and wagering Western Australia. So I just wanted to read a little bit from the paper that has now been posted on the website regarding this. A focus of the review will be financial sustainability in the face of changing conditions, noting that key funding sources of RAWA currently include the Racing Bets Levy, Point of Consumption Tax and the Totalitiser Agency Board, which is the TAB revenue.
Yep.
Identify a broad and balanced set of revenue enhancing and cost management options to support RAWA's long-term financial sustainability. Review RAWA's governance arrangements, legislative framework and regulatory compliance activities to ensure alignment with government and community expectations, and access the potential impact of financial and governance changes on metropolitan and regional racing industries, associated events and the broader community. So, revenue diversification, expenditure, balance sheet, governance, legislative and regulatory alignment, and community and industry. So none of that. What do you notice is missing?
You know what I'd noticed straight away, Mel, and maybe just for our listeners, it sounds like a lot of politico-government speak. Can you just put that in layman terms, what you've just said?
Basically, they're looking at the balance sheet and the money and the way that flows, and then how that is governed
And
under
what-
current legislation, which is under current parliamentary rules.
Yep.
And acts, and how that's all
And why do you
put
think?
together.
Why do you think? To me, it's obvious what's missing, and I'll get to that. But why do you think their focus is on the money?
Because it's a commercial business
Right.
that they're trying to keep going and substantiate, perhaps because of what might come out of an inquiry. I don't know. Obviously, the inquiry into greyhound racing is only on greyhounds.
Yep.
This encompasses harness racing and horse or thoroughbred racing.
Yep.
So it's got the three codes within it.
Yep.
But it says here, the following issues are not within the scope of this review, which is participant safety, including personal protective equipment for jockeys, workplace health and safety, which is an industry issue and currently being examined by WorkSafe, animal welfare, traceability and related reporting of injuries and deaths. Now, wouldn't you think, though, that the cost of animal welfare should be
a part of a
part of it.
financial review?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that while it says traceability and related reporting, that physical presence of where greyhounds are and the physical injuries and that is being excluded, and not the costs of possible changes to welfare schemes and things like that, as we've seen dropped recently.
I don't know. I think you're being really optimistic. I think Free the Hounds really, you take a very balanced viewpoint. You're on the side of phasing it out, I guess. But if we look at how it's set up, Mel, and the whole purpose of greyhound racing, I've said this before, the pros might talk about their purpose of the breed and how they love to run and all that stuff, yeah? But it's centred around money. It's centred around gambling revenue, isn't it? It's centred...
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I've put the question out before. If you really care about breed purpose and the dogs being able to express their innate desire to race, then go and set up a little private thingamajiggy and stop gambling on it.
Yeah.
It's about the gambling
Do
and
it
the
as
money.
an amateur sport.
Yeah, do it as an amateur sport as such.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that they're not including welfare. They've seen dogs die over and over again, over 1,500 dead in the last 10 years or so, multiple injuries. That doesn't shake them to go, oh, shit.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
poor creatures are
exactly.
getting hurt. We better step up the welfare. You pointed out not long ago that it's only about 1% of the whole budget, isn't it, Mel, that's put to welfare?
Yes, for Greyhound Code.
For Greyhound Code,
yeah.
1%.
Yeah.
So we can stop pretending that welfare is a real concern. They'll give lip service to it, but the real concern is, can we make a buck out of this, and can we get a shitload of gambling revenue and gambling taxes?
Yeah, page 5 is about all of the information that comes from the IER report, which we have repeatedly said for greyhounds is incorrect. The information is not accurate. $1.3 billion economic impact. We know that the methodology used for that is wrong.
And if you want to have a listen about that, Mel,
Yes.
because we did a deep dive
That's
with
right.
Sebastian, remember?
Yep.
Especially the pro racers listening. Go listen to episode 14. Sebastian Broadhurst did a deep economic review of this stuff and found out that IER stuff, it's dodgy at best.
Yep. And that at greyhound race meetings that there was 61,528 attendees in a year. Greyhounds WA told the hearing in 2024 that they count the number of meals sold to work out attendance and then gross it up.
Talk about anachronistic, outdated methodology. Imagine any business that went, I don't know, we just figure how many people buy a hot dog. That's how we work out how many people came.
And that's a government department.
Yeah,
they
madness.
sit within the government.
I was stunned to find that out, Mel. When I learnt that from you, that in 2026, a government-funded body doesn't keep records of attendances. It just says, we sold this many chicken palmies.
Exactly.
Right?
And
Yeah.
then they put that in a government document.
Yes.
Expect people to give credible input into.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to laugh, but it's just outrageous. So the beauty of all this, Mel, is the inquiry is coming up, right? And what an inquiry does, it shines a light and it gets down into the weeds, doesn't it? So they're going to have to answer questions. They can't just come under this cloak of these obscure stats. And I'm looking forward to that. What do you reckon, Mel? You're hepped up, aren't you?
I am, because this is the first page of questions. Initial questions to consider. Financial sustainability. Identify a broad and balanced set of revenue-enhancing and cost management options to support RAWA's long-term financial sustainability.
Yeah.
So they're asking the person making the submission to think about that. So it's obviously it's going to be positive, isn't it? It's not.
So
it's not a question about what are the
You're
issues.
talking about confirmation bias.
Yes.
They're basically saying we want you to find this out.
Yes.
Do a review and tell us how it'll work out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not let's look at it, let's review it and see what's wrong and let's make it better.
But doesn't that make sense again, Mel, in the context of an inquiry coming up?
Yes,
in the
I
context that the welfare and the death and the injury is off the charts, in the context of dropping this so-called review in the cloak of political darkness again, it's fairly obvious that the intent is not an objective exploration of needs. It's a knee-jerk reaction out of shit. We better make this look okay.
And sorry, I promise this will be my last one.
I don't believe you,
because I'm
Mel.
really annoyed.
I don't believe you.
Community, industry and other. This is the first dot point. What is needed to stimulate greater prize money and higher turnover? Increase the pool of trainers, owners, breeders and riders and improve employment in both metropolitan and country communities.
Yeah. They're trying to find a way to keep existing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I am not going to look at it anymore because I'm hepped up.
You shouldn't.
I'm hepped up. But if anybody wants to, we'll put a link to that in
check
the
it out.
show notes.
Check it out.
Yeah, please have a read and submissions for that close soon.
At the very least, Mel, it shows that their priorities are about money, not about the welfare of these beautiful creatures.
And as we've said so often, that's okay, but be honest about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing we do have to talk about before we go is our foster of the fortnight. Okay, today we have got Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
5 years old.
Stranded at a drive-in.
Yeah, very good. No cat homes, please. Sandy is a sweet, curious girl. Can you tell her colour by her name?
Ooh, Sandy, I'm going to go sand-coloured.
Tan, yep. Sandy is a sweet, curious girl who is settling beautifully into family life. From the moment she wakes up, Sandy is ready to explore the world.
Sounds like Gemma.
With her nose. She absolutely...
Yep. No, still holds.
She absolutely loves a sniffy morning walk and is quite the early riser.
Yep.
After breakfast and her walk, she's more than happy to spend the rest of the day snoozing, rotating between comfy beds and quiet spots around the house.
Nope.
In the afternoons, Sandy's playful side comes out. She's quickly learning what toys are all about and enjoys carrying them around and having little bursts of fun once her energy returns. It's been a joy for her foster carer to watch her discover these new pleasures of pet life. Sandy gets along very well with her greyhound foster brother. They happily share beds, toys and water and often snooze side by side, though Sandy is also confident enough to retreat to another room when she wants some alone time.
Yep.
She's currently comfortable being left for a few hours with her foster brother, but she hasn't yet been tested alone at home for longer periods. On walks, Sandy can get excited when she sees dogs of other breeds and sometimes gives a little growl. This behaviour is already improving with exposure and guidance. She's a strong girl who walks nicely on lead at a brisk pace, so she will need a home that is confident in handling her enthusiasm and ensuring she doesn't surge forward when something exciting catches her attention. Affectionate and people-focused, Sandy adores pats and will happily gaze lovingly into the eyes of anyone giving her attention. So there you go. If you guys have any inquiries about Sandy, please reach out to Greyhound Adoptions WA on social media or head to their website.
And also, if, we've inspired you to say good day to these beautiful creatures and they end up being a member of your family, we'd love to hear, wouldn't we, Mel?
Yes, absolutely.
Just let us know.
For sure. Send us an email.
Yeah, frankly, we're really interested.
To podcast@freethehounds.com.au.
mate.
Yeah, send us an email and let us know.
Mel?
Yes.
We have our next guest, Mark Layton. Now, this is an interesting one, Mel. Mark is a former participant.
That's right, racing participant.
Yeah. So Mark's taken the time to come on the show, and I really respect someone who's, number one, moved positions. Someone who's capable, when they're educated and they understand something, can shift their position, especially a man, because men are pretty bad at that, don't you think, Mel? Women are a little more flexible.
I think we have to be.
You move around a bit. Men, they can be stick in the muds, really. So Mark's shifted his position. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting chat, I think.
Yeah. And have you met Mark?
Yes, I have.
All right. Is he a nice fella?
Yes.
All right. I'll be the judge of that. All right. See you soon. All right, Mel, it's that time. We've got Mark Layton with us. Mark has two dogs, Oscar, who is obviously the greatest breed of them all, is a rescue greyhound, a 5-year-old ex-racer, and an Aussie Kelpie. Rosie's 3 years old, and Mark's had Rosie since she was a little puppy. There's lots to say about Mark, but I guess the interesting part for our purposes today is Mark actually comes from a family of trainers, breeders, owners, has been tending the dogs and been a part of that since he was a little kid, 8, 9 years old. Was a dog handler at one point as well. And the most extraordinary thing, Mel, I've discovered,
and the thing you're most excited about,
a little bit, is that I just met Mark today and we went to the same primary school.
It's incredible.
We went to the same bloody primary school in Hobartville in Richmond. So that's a revelation. How are you, Mark?
Really good, and thanks a lot for having me today.
Oh, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for coming.
I think you're the first person I've ever met from my old primary school, now that I'm all grown up.
You are definitely the first person. Yeah. That's the world is a small place and it works in mysterious ways.
It does.
And Mark was mentioning some of the tracks and some of the places, Richmond and Londonderry and Penrith. That's taken me way back to, and I think we have some commonalities other than our primary school. Is I was brought up in a family that thought the dogs were a fun family event. And you have a story to tell, which I'm really interested in, maybe even closer than my story of, I guess, coming to a realisation in some way that this isn't something you want to be a part of. And I really want to hear more about that. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, well, my story starts when I was around 8 years old. And my dad, with one of his good friends, decided they'd make some money by owning and racing greyhounds. So our backyard back then looked a little bit like the scene from The Castle, where there's 2 dogs and some little timber huts built and stuff. And so that's how Dad started. And pretty much he bought a dog from a friend who, I think it was about $500, and it was really slow. It was like at the end of its career and stuff and really slow, and that was Dad's practice dog. So they would take it to the track and race it and trial it and stuff like that. And that was my first introduction to what really happens when dogs aren't fast enough.
Right.
And I remember coming home from 5th grade
Yeah.
and from Hobartville Primary School and the dog not being in the yard anymore. And I said, "Oh, where's that dog, Dad?" He said, "Oh, we had it put to sleep, son." And I said, "What for?" He goes, "It's not fast enough."
Had you built some affection toward this dog?
Oh,
or was
gosh, yeah. Because, 8 years old boy, we had dogs, cats, birds, rabbits, all sorts of things that you have at that age. And I'd had dogs and pets growing up, and their time comes and they pass away and stuff. But that was usually when they were old or sick or injured or something.
Yeah. And how did you reconcile that in your mind at the time?
I didn't. I absolutely didn't. And I would go through that process for about the next 10 to 12 years before I left home, where the dogs would just disappear.
Yeah, right.
And, for that period of time, it broke me, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And after a couple of years of having a few dogs, then Dad got a bit more serious. So that was when the proper kennels got put in. So that was things like concrete for the dogs to sleep on, the old hammock bed, pretty much spend the whole day in the kennel. They'd be out for 10, 15 minutes to go to the toilet, maybe an hour at most.
I really want to pause on that because that's our understanding. We know that minimum standards are 15 minutes per 24 hours or half an hour.
Yep.
Yeah. And
That's the minimum they have to have.
and a lot of the pros will say, they have a great life, but your direct personal experience is that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's what we did when we would go to the big commercial places. Is exactly what they did. They had rows and rows of kennels. There'd be hundreds of dogs and some of them lined up. And there'd be someone there with a hose squirting out the kennels. Usually they'd take the dog out. They'd put it into a small paddock, sand, maybe a little bit of grass, almost always by itself because you didn't want it getting hurt running with another dog. The paddocks were always small because greyhounds love their zoomies and that meant injuries. We had a small area in our backyard and the dog was never allowed off the lead. That was the rule because if it decided to have a bit of a sprint in the yard and hurt itself, well, that cost money, didn't it?
Yeah.
So they spent their whole life on the lead and in that concrete kennel until we did trials and racing.
And this is what you're witnessing, from a very young age, dogs disappearing, dogs, I guess, being treated with the most minimal of human care. And you use a really strong phrase there that broke you as a young kid. What impact that has on a young kid seeing sentient creatures treated like this?
I can't speak for anyone else, but for me it hurt a lot. And it probably wasn't until I was around 30 years old that I came to grips with all those dogs that just vanished. And around that age, I'd had a career in the military and left the military and was working in a corporate life and was just really struggling.
And that's worth noting as well, Mel, is we're talking about Mark's was in the Navy since he was 19 years age, right? A submariner. He's an engineer. He's a business owner. You're a man who can get shit done and face the world, but this has affected you on an emotional level. Yeah,
definitely. And it was around 30 years of age that I just started struggling, and I went and saw my doctor and went and saw some counsellors and effectively worked out that I had
PTSD.
Yeah, from all the dog deaths. And I worked at a vet when I was quite young as well, which I'll come to shortly. But as a family, we had, I'd say over the years I was there, maybe 20 greyhounds, and we only ever kept one. One. Who we used to breed from, and then she was lucky enough to spend the rest of our life with us. The rest either got sold, usually for a few $100s, or we just took them to the vet and they got the needle. And always the part that hurt the most for me, and I understand my parents were trying to do what they thought was helpful by shielding me from it, but I would go to school in the morning and come home with no dog there. And it was just, that one's gone. And there was no, and since then I've had lots of dogs. And if you're a dog person, you'll know that, when the time comes and you decide to have them put to sleep, whether you do it at home or at a vet surgery, most people choose to stay with their dog or at least be there to the point where they can handle it. But having that taken away from me, that's the part that broke me. As a teenage boy, that was really hard, really hard.
Yeah. It's hard to listen to, and I really appreciate you sharing. We've heard from a vet who used to, an on-track a nurse,
Vet nurse, yeah,
Honey, who said in her experience, over the 3 years I think she worked, only one owner ever came to pick up a dead dog from the morgue. Out of all of the dozens of that she'd witnessed, that they only one wanted to be with this creature. And you're speaking to something even deeper than that a young kid having an attachment, and if you're a dog person, as you say, I've got two beautiful hounds, Bunny and Bo. I will be holding her hand. I'll be there all night holding her hand, as you have Mel, when she leaves this place. This is a tough one, Mel. This is Mark, what you're speaking about, it is PTSD. It is a traumatic experience, and it's complex trauma, not just an acute trauma of witnessing loss time and time again. But was there anything significant in particular that really shifted your stance on things?
Yeah, there was one thing. And I said before I got here I wouldn't cry, but we'll see how we go.
Oh, mate, you're in a safe place here.
Look, there's even tissues just in case.
I won't be far behind you at this rate.
So I was about 17, maybe nearly 18, and we had a dog called, his racing name was Sir Stanley. His kennel name, or pet name that I used to have for him, was Shep. He was a brindle dog, really big boy, and he was the most gentle greyhound I'd ever come across. He was given to us because he wasn't any good, and it's not that he wasn't any good, he couldn't run a long distance. So he was like watching Usain Bolt at the Olympics. 100 metres, 200 metres, that's it. And he was the same. The track he used to race at, Lithgow, had one of the shortest tracks, or one of the shortest races in the country. It was only about 240 metres.
Yep.
And poor fella, come 260 metres, he'd be like, I've had enough, and he'd just stop. But for that first 240 metres, he was unbeatable.
Yeah.
He held the track record for over a decade. And he became so popular with the crowd there that the bookmakers wouldn't take bets because he was such a sure thing to win.
Right.
Wow.
And because effectively they couldn't make any money out of him. And he'd become a favourite, and people would cheer and stuff when he would run past the post and that. And he'd raced 40, 50 times, and Mum and Dad had decided that was it. He'd earned his retirement, so to speak. And they even named the race, the first race of that day, after him. There was people in the grandstand watching and cheering, and it had rained the night before. Not a big deal in the Blue Mountains. And they're supposed to drag the track with a tractor to flatten the sand. And I'd later find out that they couldn't be bothered. And so Dad laid him in the boxes. I remember being at the start-finish line watching, and Mum was catching. And boxes flew open, out he come in front, didn't get touched by another dog, nothing near him. And about 100 metres into the race, he put his foot in a hole. That was in the track. And he tumbled. And somersaulted over. The rest of the pack ran over him. And when it happened, the crowd just went silent. It was really bizarre. Normally people are yelling and screaming at their dog to win or another one to catch. It just went quiet. And the race finished, and at that stage I could see my dad running from the boxes to where the dog was. I could see he was moving, couldn't get up. And he carried it in his arms back to the kennels. And we found out that he was paralysed. He's broken his back in 3 places. And an inquiry was done and everything, and they found out that, they just didn't bother to drag the track. It was like, first race, who cares? Just get going. And we never got an apology. We never got a sorry, nothing. So we took that dog to a vet close to where we lived, which was maybe an hour from the track. And the vet just said, let's just get rid of it now. And Mum, to her credit, said, no, that's not happening. We're going to see if there's anything that can be done. So he lay there on that vet's for 3 days because it was a Saturday they used to race. So come Tuesday, what happened? I went to school, he got the needle, and I come home and didn't get to say goodbye. And that was the point where I'd kind of had enough. And even at that age, I grew up in a military family. Dad was military, and 2 generations before that, it wasn't the sort of family where you just said, I'm not doing that anymore, Right. But that was the end of it for me.
Yeah.
And, to watch him, like he'd earned my parents a lot of money.
He'd given a lot to your
Yeah.
family and to others. And when you were speaking about how the crowd went silent, the crowd had built an attachment to this beautiful creature as well.
They had, without a doubt. People used to come up to us and say, "Oh, thanks, he's such a great dog. We love him, and I've made this much money," and it was just all money.
He didn't get his retirement. He didn't get his place in the sun after all that he'd given.
Mm.
He got a needle in the end.
I remember thinking years later, watching the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, where he goes through all that stuff and he finally becomes like the last gladiator standing, yet he still dies. And it's like this horrible ending. You're like, but you did everything right and it still didn't matter, did it?
Jeez.
And that's what it was like for him. And that was my breaking point. So.
That's it. Yeah. Okay.
You
Oh.
okay?
Yeah.
It's difficult to proceed as normal, Mel, because we know statistically what happens. But when you hear it up close and personal like that,
Yeah.
you know.
I just also think that there must be so many people like you that feel this way, that are involved, but can't get out or speak out or whatever happened after your decision. And obviously you then joined the Navy and you got away from the whole thing entirely. But there must be, and this is where in WA particularly, because it's all government owned, I really struggle because where is the duty of care to people? We're all about welfare, absolutely. But there's also, this has to have impact on people that are involved. Where is that duty of care by our government that runs it here? It's just, I don't understand. I just cannot get my head around it.
Well, that kind of does lead me into my next question, Mark, is what do you think the reasons that people stay involved in this sport, given what they know? Because from our side of the fence, we often are a little baffled when we see the injury, the death, and it goes on and it gets worse. And then some of the responses seem to look away from the injury and death. But do they know, like, are the participants aware? They must be surely of how many of these beautiful creatures are getting killed. And if so, what makes them want to keep being involved?
After I decided to have nothing more to do with it, and it was probably 25, 30 years before I went back to a dog track to see what, if anything, had changed after that day.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did notice is that while lots of rules and regulations had improved and stuff, the people involved and the outcomes for the dogs were exactly what they were when I watched Sir Stanley die.
Ah, right.
And what I mean by that is, so I don't have any brothers or sisters, it was just mum, dad and me, and it was something we did as a family. A lot of my friends were similar. Dad's best friend had a big commercial kennel and we would go around Sunday and have lunch and train the dogs.
Like a way of life.
It was part of belonging to something.
Right.
Same way someone, might belong to a local fishing club or to a bowls club or anything that they're involved in. And if you stay with those people long enough, you start to believe everything everyone tells you, that it is okay and the dogs do get a good home and the odd injury isn't the end of the world and there's lots worse things in the world, so maybe people should focus on that. But it's not the point. I've only seen two things in my life change that I think genuinely helped greyhounds in racing. And that was the change from, and this is a long time ago, from grass to sand tracks in Australia. So when we first started, most of the tracks were grass, similar to horse racing. And the injury rate was 10 times what it is now. It was really bad. And like every race, dogs would fall, every race. And then they changed to sand, and that helped a lot.
Yeah.
So that was a positive change. And the only other one I've seen is the adoption of things like greyhounds as pets, and whether in WA it's the government or other private organisations actually allowing people to keep them as pets and encouraging people to keep them as pets.
Mm.
So they're the only two things in 40 years I've seen improve for the dogs. They now at least have people trying to find homes for them and sand tracks, but nothing else improved. The tracks are just as bad as they were. It doesn't matter which track you go to, whether you go to Cannington or you go to Wentworth Park or Sandown or any of the flash expensive ones. Behind the scenes, the kennels are the same. The people that take those dogs out and put them in the boxes and race them do it for exactly the same reasons, which is money.
Yeah.
If you took away the prize money or the sponsorship or the ability to gamble,
Yep.
and you want it. People say, "Oh, it's a hobby. It's a hobby." Fine, I've got
Yep.
lots of hobbies.
Yep.
None of them are funded. I have to pay my money
Yep.
to run those hobbies.
You are singing my tune, Mark. You are absolutely singing. I've said this time again on the podcast. If what you really care about is purpose of breed and getting them to do what they love, or what you really love is the sense of community and whatever, then go do it, but stop chucking a bet on them. Stop having prize money. You can do that, right?
Yeah.
If that's what you really care about. But what you're saying from the inside perspective is that isn't actually what is cared about. What's cared about is making a buck or two. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, it's completely what it is. If there was no money in greyhound racing to be made and it was a hobby, how many people do you think would really do it? Like when my dad started, who says, "Oh, this might be something good for the family. We'll run the dog around the track." Yeah. Not thousands of dogs and millions of dollars in tracks. None of that would happen.
Yeah.
Because it's expensive.
Yeah.
Like really expensive. Yeah. Feeding, kenneling, vet fees, track fees. So they have to take money from gambling industry and they got to take money from government. Otherwise it doesn't work.
Won't stand up.
One of the things I look at these days, like there's obviously there's horse racing, there's harness racing and greyhound racing in Australia. And I'd love to see all three stopped. And for me, greyhound racing is the worst one. At least with harness racing and with horse racing, the cost involved in owning a horse and stabling it and running it is, 10 times, 100 times what it is a greyhound. And you've got a jockey on it. Yeah. And it's not in the jockey's interest to break that horse down. They can pull it up. And sometimes they can't, they don't, and the horses pass away. But there's the chance. A sire-hound doesn't do that. It just runs and runs until effectively it can't or it's dead. There's nothing to stop it when it's got an injury to pull it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they fall and they take a bad tumble, you see them finish if they can and even struggle to get up.
Because their instincts are, on one of the Facebook posts, some mob posted, they love, their tails are wagging and they get so excited when we put them in the trailers. And I felt like saying, look, one of my dogs, his tail wags something chronic when it sees a bunch of motorbikes drive past on the street because I rode a motorbike. I don't let him off to go running with the bikes because it's my responsibility to know that he might get hurt or killed if I let him do that. Mm-hmm. Right? So these greyhounds, they might get all excited because they don't know that there's a good chance when we chuck them on that track they might get hurt or killed. We know that. Mm-hmm. It's up to us to know that.
I remember when we would have litters of puppies and then you'd start the whole training process, literally from when they were weaned. And people say, oh, greyhounds, they love to run, they're born to run. They're not born to run in an oval track with 8 out of a box. No one will convince me of that because they're not.
I'm happy to agree that greyhounds love to run. I think they do. Do they love to race, which is a complete different kettle of fish?
Very different. Yeah. Very different.
Mark, I'm going to ask you to maybe dive into something again that's a little bit painful. We know that you were trackside to witness the awful injuries that were suffered by Trunky Jennings, who broke both front legs at Northam on July 21st. Can you give us your account of that and how that affected you and share with our listeners and up close and personal?
So this is a story almost by chance in that we'd already adopted our greyhound Oscar. And I'd organised a weekend away in York for my wife and I and both the dogs at Airbnb. The lady had said, you can bring the dogs, they can stay inside. And my wife's from the UK and she'd never seen a greyhound race. And I said, well, I'm going to take you to Northam. I said, it's winter, they race in Northam and it's a country track. I said, I'll guarantee it will look exactly the same as what it did 30 years ago when I used to go. So off we went and sure enough, the moment you pull up to Northern Greyhound Track, the first thing you think is, this should have been bulldozed 100 years ago. It's falling down, it's falling apart. I reckon I counted maybe 10 people that weren't directly involved in handling dogs there that day, at best, including us. Anyhow, so we sat and watched a few races and I explained to her what the handlers do, what the catchers do, how it all works, why people do it. And then the race came around where this particular dog was entered in and the lure went past, they jumped from the boxes, went down the main straight, and like almost all oval tracks, you can be almost certain that the worst injuries are that first corner. Because there's 8 dogs trying to squeeze into what is effectively one spot right on the lure line.
Yep.
And this dog fell. And like often, it doesn't necessarily look bad at first, but it tumbled really bad. And all I could do was picture that dog from when I was really young, the same thing. And the race continued, the lure went on, and you could hear it screaming. You could see it couldn't get up. at that stage I didn't know it had broken both its legs, but you could see it was in a lot of pain. And it was lying right in the middle of the track, so on the racing line. So it didn't stop the lure, didn't stop the race, just went all the way back around, and the dogs just ran straight over it because it couldn't get up. And at that stage, the handlers that had put the dogs in the box were starting to walk back. And I watched the person, the gentleman who had that dog, and as he walked past it on the track, he'd have been no more than 3 metres from it. He just looked at it and shook his head and kept going. He didn't stop at all or even give it a glance. It was just like, you got to be kidding me. And 2 young girls came in the little ambulance van that follows around. At best, they'd have been maybe 25. And they load this dog in because they couldn't get up into the back of the van, and that was it. And back to the kennels, which, gosh, is probably at northern maybe 50 metres from the track entrance. And a bit later, one of the stewards was walking past, and someone who was a regular there said, "Oh, what about that dog?" And he just made that symbol where you take run your finger across your neck, like as if something's dead, like it's like a cutting, and just shook his head and said, "Both legs." He goes, "It's dead." And someone said, "Oh, that's a shame, isn't it?" "Oh, well." And we'd have been sitting no further than a metre or 2. And then my wife, she was really shaken up when she heard that. And I said, "That's what really happens. That's the bit people don't see."
Isn't it tragically ironic that it came full circle for you as that young kid, and then your last visit to a track is another tragic death of, I don't know. I don't even know how to respond to this one, Mel.
It also shows to me the frequency of it happening. If you can go that long without visiting a track and then witness such carnage, it just obviously happens far more than what we're made aware of.
Yeah, and the part people don't see is if you watch the telecast of a race, they follow the lure and the leader of the race around, and you'll hear, "Oh, there's been an incident," or "There's a dog stumbled," or "It's been checked," is the other word you'll hear. Checked basically means something's bad has happened, yeah? And you never see what happens to that dog. Occasionally it'll finish, but almost never do you see what actually happens, yeah? And people go, "Oh, it just stumbled," or whatever. No, it didn't just stumble. Something is torn or broken. Very rarely does a dog fall or get checked and not have a significant injury. And that's the part people don't realise. They're like, "Oh, don't they just get up and run again?"
Yeah. They just fell over.
Yeah. And they don't see 2 young girls loading it into an ambulance, and they don't see the owner going, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me, aren't you?" And they don't see it going into a bag, into a freezer, and being dumped off later.
And this happens over and over again. For those hounds that do have a fall and get back up and race again, this is a repetitive assault upon their bodies, right? You know, the average starters, I read somewhere, was around 40 starts per greyhound. There's the cumulative effect of these falls. We can break them slowly as well as kill them all at once, can't we?
Oh, definitely. Well, I'm 49 now, and injuries I had when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, they're only just getting sore now. Bet anyone my age would say the same thing. So you race a dog for maybe 3 or 4 years old. They've had all these injuries, and then the owners and trainers discard them, and then people come along and adopt them, and the poor dog's broken. And all those injuries, people go, "Oh, it gets a great life once it's finished racing." Yeah, it'd get a brilliant life if it never raced in the first place because it wouldn't have the injuries.
Yeah.
When you and I spoke about what you'd done as a kid when you worked at the vet, would you mind, and if you don't want to speak about it, I understand, but this is something that we often get pushback about, the way that the dogs are treated post-death, if you like.
Yeah, so this is one that is pretty graphic and some people might struggle to listen to a little bit. So one of the first jobs I had out of high school was working at a local veterinary surgery. And so I was looking at being a veterinary nurse at that stage. And this is the part that stopped me from wanting to do that as a job. I remember working there, and my job was when the dogs would come in, and this is particularly greyhounds I'm primarily talking about here, the owners would just drop them off at the front and they'd pay their $50, $100, whatever it was, and that was for them to be euthanised. Right? No questions. Didn't matter why, injury, no injury, young, old, that was just the vet's job. And they'd just get led into the back room, and often the vet, otherwise a nurse or literally anybody, would just fill a syringe full of a liquid out of a 4-litre tub and you just pump it straight into the dog and let it die. And then my job, being the new guy, was to bag them. So that meant putting them in a big black plastic bag. And I remember the words were, make sure you double bag them, Mark, because of the long legs, we don't want the legs to stick through the bag and people to see that. So I would pick up these anywhere from 25 to 35 kilogram dogs, put them in 2 black garbage bags, tie them in a knot and put them in a chest freezer. We had about 4 big chest freezers out the back. And when the chest freezers were full, which sometimes would only be a week, I'd load them into a caged trailer, take the work car, which didn't have any signage on it, and I'd drive it to the local tip. And we had an agreement with the local tip that when we got there, because they didn't want people to see frozen dogs being pushed into the rubbish tip, they would come along with the dozer. And so I would back up, push the dogs out the back into the garbage tip, and they would dump a load of soil on them. So that was back in the day when people used to scavenge around the tip, if you remember. You used to be able to walk around, pick up all sorts. Yeah. And it was like the council would be like, we don't want someone to come across a dead dog, do we? So I'd chuck them all in one pile, and the dozer guy would come over and put a load of soil on top, and back to the vet I'd go. So that was how all the greyhounds were treated, every single last one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It just... I don't have the words, really. I don't. I wish I did. Well, I do have the words, but they're probably not right to say. Is there anything, I guess, else that you want listeners to know about your time there?
I guess one thing that I'm sure people will say is, oh, that was in the past. And you're right, it was. It was a long time ago. But with my small involvement in the industry again now, like I said, very little has changed for the dogs. And while more of them find homes now and there's more regulation, at the end of the day, the dogs still have a terrible life. They still die. People still gamble on them. It's not like we're short of things to gamble on. I can pick up my phone and bet on everything you can imagine. So it's not like the argument, oh, we need things to gamble on. You've got plenty of things to gamble on. You can't say, oh, what about all the money and jobs? Like, we're the richest state in Australia. We have been for a decade. Government doesn't need it from a money perspective. Yeah. We've got 2 tracks and a half-time track. Next to Tasmania, we're the smallest when it comes to greyhound racing. Like, for me, it's a no-brainer that WA should be the next state to get rid of it. And I understand, like any industry, while I would love it just to be stopped this afternoon, I know that's not practical. In reality, phasing something out. And there are people who have jobs and that somehow needs to be looked into. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. I think anyone who would like to see the greyhound racing end would prefer to see it end with a date and a plan versus a constant, oh, we'll review it, we'll think about it. Oh, what about the money? What about this? They've just gone and put a ban on fishing for demersal fish. And there's hundreds of people that have businesses and charter boats and commercial fishermen, and they didn't give them much notice. And I'm pretty sure they're not exactly happy. They'll find a way, they'll work things out. And the people who do greyhound training as a hobby, it won't make any difference to them. For the handful that do it as an actual business, it will.
Yeah, and there's less than 50 of those in the state.
Yeah, it's such a tiny amount.
Of W. It's not going to crush an industry. There's no industry.
And do you think, like, we, Free the Hounds, have maintained that these changes that you've spoken of, regulatory changes and things like that that have occurred, we kind of say, well, that was due to pressure from advocacy groups, more so than the industry saying, waking up one day and saying, oh, we're going to do better. So that's what always worries us, is if we take the foot off the pedal and stop calling them out as much, will things go back? Because just because you've got regulation doesn't mean it's going to be followed, because you've got people that have been in there before the regulation was brought in or they were toughened.
Especially when you're self-regulating,
exactly.
when you don't have an independent oversight.
Yeah.
Of course it'll go back to what it was. I remember watching the RSPCA get involved way back in the 90s when they used to still live bait in New South Wales. Used to tie 2 rabbits by their feet with zip ties or cable ties to the lure on a trial track, and the owners wanted to do it. It was the RSPCA that said, look, you can't do that. That's not humane. So if you'd have taken them or any other advocacy group out of it, of course the trainers would have still done it. They all believed it made a difference, which it doesn't. You know, they chase anything, sight hounds. It just needs movement.
Mm.
Doesn't need a bleeding rabbit. But lo and behold, it still continued. You had to pay a fortune to do it though. But I went to trial tracks where it still happened all the time.
Mm.
So if you take away groups like Free the Hounds and the others, of course they'll go back to what they want to do. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's our biggest fear, I think, and that's what we say to participants. If it's only a few bad apples, why are they still there? Why didn't you weed them out? Why did it take anybody speaking out against you to do so? And we just think that we can't stop until it's stopped because there is nobody holding them accountable otherwise.
And again, to Mark's point, why would they when the incentive is well established that we're in this to make a profit? There's a couple of hobbyists maybe, but the bulk of it is let's make some money here. So there's a conflict of interest because welfare concerns and all that impede the money making, right? Like it costs money to build welfare and it might reduce money making potential. So it seems, again, using your term, a no-brainer that things would go in that direction. I would love to just keep talking to you forever. We have so much in common. You're a military family. I'm a military family from Hobartville. There's just so much that we have in common on that level. And just the depth of feeling that you have, Mark, for what you've been through and how it's impacted you in your capacity as a man to go against the grain of your family tradition, of what you've been brought up with, and say, no, I'm gonna speak for something different. I just admire that so much. I do have a question for you, though. How is it with the family? You know, do they understand your perspective? Has it meant there's been a rupture? If you're able to speak to that, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm estranged from my parents. Have been for almost 20 years now, which is a really sad thing to say. I've got 3 kids and they've only ever met one on her first birthday.
I'm really sad to hear that.
Yeah.
You know what, if I'm actually really honest, part of me is again heartened that you have chosen something. You have made a choice based on integrity and truth, and but the sacrifice you've made to do that means that you've lost relationships with your family.
Yeah, it does. And you said before about the effect it has on children or teenagers or adolescents going to the track or being involved and stuff. And I won't be the only one. I had friends at school, probably the schools that you and I went to, that were involved that didn't like it. And there'll still be people, like when I was at Northam, most of the handlers were school-age kids.
Yep.
Yeah. On a Monday, not during school holidays.
Yep.
And that'll simply be mum and dad saying, come on, you've got to come down to the track and do the dogs instead of going to school. That alone, like with 3 teenagers, was enough to make my blood boil. I'm like, what are they doing here? This is not a career, a job. Send them to school where they should be. They don't need to be part of this.
Absolutely. Do you think that a lot of these people involved, like it's systemic, it's from families, it's from generational thing that it's passed down rather than young people getting involved?
Yeah, I can't imagine any young person you don't just start into greyhound racing randomly. It's because your parents, your auntie, your uncle, your granddad, someone like that did it. So all those younger people I saw at the track, they'll be on the side of this isn't the end of the world, we should continue to do it.
Yeah.
And that for me is really sad because, you know, their parents will get to a point where they don't want to be involved in the sport or they're too old and stuff. And that generation of people will die out. But to have passed it on to your kids and then potentially their kids and family, friends, it's just that's the part that'll just perpetuate it forever.
Yeah.
And particularly being a state-owned industry, that's just wrong. And they know it is. There's some simple things they could do to stop the involvement from kids and adolescents.
Well, you have to be 18 to go to the casino. So the basic thing for me,
doesn't make sense.
There's gambling taking place on the floor, if you like, at the track. They shouldn't be having kids there, let alone advertising it as a family-friendly night. It just...
Yep. This has been extraordinary, Mel, and I mean that sincerely. This has been extraordinary. I'd like to finish maybe on, not to silver line anything, but to remember that there's something beautiful about the hounds, and to ask you, Mark, what in particular about the greyhounds. You've spoken a lot about the trauma experiences you've had with greyhounds. What's the joyous part of greyhounds for you? What is it that you love? Because to me, the greyhounds are the best. What are they to you?
Gee, for me, it's really interesting after so many years having them growing up really young and seeing them treated as a commodity and only the odd one being a companion pet, and then to having one now again as a pet and I'd forgotten how brilliant they are as a dog. Whether it's a greyhound, a whippet, or any other sight hound or whatever, they're all so very similar in their nature. They're the most gentle dogs you could imagine, and they're great for your mental health. All dogs are, to be honest, but they just have this ability to make you laugh at yourself. And like I've got like my Kelpie, so really popular dog, TV shows about Kelpies, there's movies about Kelpies. Do people stop and ask me about her? No.
And I bet she's so cute.
She's got like a really cute name.
Rosie.
She's got a pink collar and she does tricks and everything.
Yeah,
and people are like, oh, she's nice. They're like, oh, but what about your greyhound? Tell me about that. And I'm like, oh. And everyone, they always want to know. They're just curious why you've got one. And so many people say, oh, if I had space, or my next dog is going to be a greyhound. Yeah, it's a club. I don't know how to describe it. It is, yeah. If you're ever lucky enough to have one in your life, you'll realise how special they really are. They're an incredible companion, they really are. And if you're even considering it, then by all means give it a go. It'll be the best decision you ever make.
I don't think I'm alone in this room, and I would imagine with our listeners, in being deeply affected by your story and your courage in vulnerability. I think often we think, especially in the military, courage means being big and strong. But to me, courage is facing your own vulnerability and then using that to stand up for the vulnerability of others. So I just salute you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was harder than I thought telling this.
Really?
Yeah. I haven't really told it to anyone, to be honest.
Well, we're very
privileged. So I thought the general public and anyone else was a good start.
Yes, so. Yeah, get it out there. Get it all out at once.
Yeah, you've touched me today, and I would imagine you might have touched some of our listeners. I doubt we're going to touch the die-hard 4%ers. I doubt it very much. There's 4% of people, it's been established in WA, who are strongly supportive greyhound racing, but that means there's a bunch of people on the fence that aren't sure, and I'm hoping that what you've said today will help them maybe be a little more sure about where they want to stand.
Yeah, I really hope so as well. So for anyone who's at all worried, it's all completely true, every last bit of it. From the bottom of my heart, I'll give you my word. There's nothing I've said here today that I wasn't either involved with or witnessed myself.
I appreciate your time. Mel?
I'm speechless today. I really am very honoured and privileged for your trust more than anything.
Thanks so much for giving me the chance to tell it.
Mel, I don't know what to say about that one. I think I've said all I can say. That was a very special episode.
It was.
I do want to, just a little matter of business though, I forgot to mention that on top of everything else Mark does, he supports his wife Claire's small business. And guess what the small business is, Mel? It's not shoe sales. It's not stock portfolio management. It's online food blog with an international following. Sprinkles and Sprouts. Sprinkles and Sprouts, Mel.
No, it sounds yum. Oh, actually go and have a look at it. I've had a look and it's so yum. And I really wish we had had time to talk to Mark about that as well.
Let's have him back on.
Yeah. Go and check it out. His wife is very talented and a very clever lady.
Sprinklesandsprouts.com if you want to check it out. I'm still a little bit unsettled but inspired by that conversation. And I've got a funny feeling our listeners will be unsettled and inspired as well. If you're listening, stand up, hold yourself with integrity, take a risk to do what maybe others won't want you to do, and be a voice for the hounds. So one day, Mel, we shall release the hounds.